Religion in Birmver is our next topic of discussion. I love Norse mythology. As a kid, there was an illustrated Norse mythology book that I would check out from the library multiple times, read cover to cover. Lots of fun. It was fun in part because it was the same as and yet different from Greek mythology. I'm a big fan of mythology in general. And you could definitely draw parallels to the Greek mythology, but the culture was different, and so some of the aspects of the stories were also very different. Obviously, Birmver being based on the Norse, I'm going to go back to Norse mythology and see what I can pull up. We'll start by saying that there's not that much in Axe that directly relies on any particular choice of religion or god or what have you. The base game, the Axe main book, it only has 4 default classes, and that's the fighter, the cleric, the mage, and the thief. And the cleric there's no choices. It's not like newer, like Pathfinder or 5e or anything. There are choices that you're making, but it's not within the class itself. So once you get into a class, you get what the class gives you. And so there's no mechanical difference between clerics of different deities. You're not choosing domains like in 3rd edition or anything like that. Now, you can make custom classes for the various clerics in 2 different ways. So one is to take the cleric spell list and modify it for a particular type of cleric. So you can say, well, this is a cleric of the ocean god, so he's not going to learn any kind of like flame strike or other fire spells. I actually haven't looked at the spell lists in Axe for quite some time, so I'm not quite sure what is and is not there. But for my thought, you just let the player pick whatever spells they want. Who cares? There's not that much. You don't gain super much by going through and modifying the spell lists. But if somebody is playing a cleric and they're really interested in, doing it for their particular character, well, one, they're not going to pick spells that aren't thematically appropriate to begin with, so you don't have to worry about that. And then you might, on a case-by-case basis, allow them to have spells from, like, the wizard class, the mage spell list or whatever that are appropriate. But those are minor things that'll come up kind of as needed. The other way you can do it is to create a custom class. And in the default book for Axe, there's the 4 default classes, and then they have 4 campaign classes that kind of illustrate what you can do by modifying the classes. So the variant cleric is called a blade dancer, and it's based on a particular goddess of war from the Aran campaign setting. And so, like the blade dancers, they're all women. Only women are admitted to the blade dancers. And they are... they trade in the cleric's heavy armor. So they wear, leather armor and light armor. And instead of using the normal cleric blunt weapon restriction, they use swords because they're blade dancers and they dance around with swords. Also, clerics don't usually... clerics get to fight with a weapon and a shield. Blade dancers trade in the weapon shield in order to use 2 weapons, so they can have, like, 2 swords. And then, of course, they've got a couple little bonuses for some of these trade-offs. And so that's a possibility. If there was any particular god or something that I wanted to kind of shuffle people towards, I could make a custom class for them. But this, again, is something where I'm not going to go through the... class-making process to make up a particular version if there's not a player who's interested in doing that. So I would work with the player to kind of figure it out. Okay, so all of that introduction said, the first thing is essentially, if you're going to be playing in Birmver, you can pick any of the Norse gods. It's fine. But there are some, that we're going to come up with a little bit of differences. But they're going to mostly follow along the same. Except you have to remember that things are flipped here. And I don't just mean male-female flip or whatever. Remember that the colonizing force that came to Birmver and established Birmver were the Jotunsdottir. So they're the daughters of giants. So the emphasis in the Norse mythology is not on the gods' side, it's on the giants' side. However, among the Voss and the Varsk, they do have, they're more likely to worship the actual Norse gods. However, in a way, actually, it makes it so that the Norse gods themselves are more of an enemy pantheon, because the people that are most likely going to worship them as gods are the Varsk, and the Varsk are the bad guys. So, all right. So what I've done is I went through Norse mythology, and I did some research on the giants, which normally are not the focus. However, once you start looking into giants, you realize that pretty much everybody is related to a giant somehow. There are a lot of giants within the Norse mythos, or half giants, or what have you. So what we're going to do here, I've got some pictures pulled up. The first one is really small. I don't know why I started with the small one when I could have started with the big one. But the main goddess, the Jotun, for whom the Jotun's daughters are named, is Hildr. So now this is me taking creative license, because Hildr, whose name actually means battle, is she's a Valkyrie in Norse mythology. She's one of the 12 Valkyries, and she flies around after battle and picks out the valiant dead who are going to go to Valhalla. That's the real Norse mythology. In Birmver, Hildr is a giant. She's a giantess. She's in charge of kind of war and valor and honor and battle. And she does pretty much the same thing. She judges those who die in battle. And if the woman warrior is worthy, she will take them from the battlefield. Now, this is more of a spiritual taking. Their bodies stay behind. But you can earn a place in Folkvanger. Now, you've probably never heard of Folkvanger before. Everybody knows that when Norse people die on the field of battle, and they're chosen by the Valkyrie, they're taken to Valhalla, which is Odin's realm, where these warriors are going to fight and feast until Ragnarok comes, and then they're going to be the armies of the gods in Ragnarok. One of the things that's not really emphasized in pop culture is that the goddess Freya, who's from a slightly different pantheon, is also a goddess of battle, and she also picks valiant warriors who have been slain in battle and takes them to Folkvanger, which is essentially her version of Valhalla. In the Norse mythology, Odin and Thor and all them are part of the Aesir, and then Frey and Freya and another group of gods are part of the Vossir. And they, historians think they were actually two different sets of gods, worshipped by different people. And then these people eventually kind of grew together, and so they shoved them all together, but they were two different pantheons that kind of got combined. And there are a lot of similarities between them. And so there's a thought that Odin's Valhalla and Freya's Folkvanger were similar ideas among two different people. And so then they kind of got smashed together. And now you have that half of the dead go to Valhalla and half go to Folkvanger. I like Folkvanger, so we're going to use Folkvanger. Freya is, of course, a goddess. And so it makes more sense to just appropriate her version into this. And it's easy enough to explain to players. You just say, it's Valhalla, but, different. So here we have, right here in the middle, is Hildr, and the rest of these are the other Valkyries. In this game, in Birmver, the Valkyries are all giants. They're all companions of Hildr, but Hildr is the one who's basically their leader. You can, if you want, worship one of the other Jotuns, but the thing is, Hildr was the Jotun, the giant, who gave birth to the first Jotun's daughter, and that is our next one. So actually, we got a couple pictures here. This is just Hildr and the Valkyries flying out on their magic flying horses over a field of battle, which is kind of flames and smoke and whatnot down here. And then if you've ever watched some of my other videos, you know that what I basically do is I go to Google image search and I type in various things. And then when I find a picture, I go ahead and just, throw it into another tab or save it into a folder. So this is somebody's deviant art, Peter Prime, it looks like. And this is titled Valkyrie Hildr. So I really like good full plate style armor on female characters. I don't know why, but I also really like the idea of the armored skirt that you see sometimes. So yeah, there's this. And then in a separate picture, now I don't know if this is like an anime character, Valkyrie Hildr, some anime used the name and so they're drawing her, but this is a somewhat similar picture. This was by Nigro Maggot, and this is called Hildr Battle Valkyrie. But it was kind of full platey red armor again. Of course, this one's more, revealing, but... And then she's, of course, lording over an army of the dead. Interesting. All right, so then next we have Brynhildr. So Brynhildr, the name, it ends in Hildr, which is battle, and then Bryn is armor. So Brynhildr actually means battle armor. And she is the first Jotun's daughter. She was Hildr's daughter. Nobody cares who her father is because the father isn't important in this. All that's important is that her mom was Hildr, a giant, and so she is a giant's daughter. She's known as the Jotun's daughter, or the Shield Maiden, and being the first of this half-giant breed, she accomplished many daring feats and was raised up to essentially demigod status. Now, in this picture, I mean, she's got angel wings, which, fine, whatever, and she's got blonde hair, but there's a woman who's actually thought to be a historical Brynhildr, Brynhild, and she was like a princess, essentially, among the Germanic tribes, and she had red hair. But, so, in my version, Brynhildr has red hair. Hildr can be, blonde or whatever she wants to be. But, yeah. So, essentially, she's more of the same of her mom. So, she's big into battle, big into heroics, big into doing honorable, valorous deeds on the field of battle, etc. She didn't die. She's immortal and lives up in the Birmver version of where the gods live, or the Jotuns live. And there's another one. This one's just a less kind of fierce battle one of someone called Bryn. So that's Brynhildr. This is apparently by Alicia the Black. Drawn in September of 2017, so rather current picture. All right, so, and this is another one. I don't remember what the story is, what the myth is behind this, but this is supposed to be either Hildr or Brynhildr, and this is some other person. But I just like that she's kind of all confrontational. Okay, so, and this is another one, another badass picture. Again, blonde hair instead of red hair, but badass warrior woman. Her chest plate's a little bit stupid, but the rest of her is very well equipped for battle, and it is enjoyable. Okay, so now finally the next one. So the next god / giant is Angrboda. Boom! Mistress of Loki, mother of the Leviathan servant Jormungand, the fierce wolf Fenrir, and the soul keeper of the dead Hela. So in actual Norse myth, Loki married Angrboda, who was a giantess, and she's the one who gave birth to these, the world serpent, Fenrir the wolf, and the goddess Hela, who keeps the dead. In this game, she's known as the mother of beasts. The father of the beasts doesn't matter. Nobody cares. Angrboda in Norse means one who brings grief, or she who offers sorrow. So obviously, not a great person. She's also known as Jarnvidya, which means she of the iron wood. So she lives in the iron woods. I think I have a picture of that coming up in a moment. Let's skip ahead to this one. She is she gives birth to a bunch of monsters, essentially. Now, this is going into Birmver and a little bit of the other one. But within the mythology of Birmver, her job is that she gives birth to all these monsters. And the purpose of the monsters is to test the Jotunsdottir, to test them, to make sure that they're strong enough and smart enough and fierce enough to take on, these challenges. Those who fall to the monsters obviously weren't worthy of their giant heritage. This is another one, more different one, NorseMythology.net. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be Angrboda. No, I'm sorry, that's not Angrboda. This is Angrboda, and then this is Hel, or Hela, and then that's Jormungandr, and then that is Fenrir. So yeah, Angrboda plays within the game Axe. The alignment system is essentially lawful, which is lawful good, and then chaotic, which is like chaotic evil. Kind of. It's not exactly that, but chaos is all the monster type races, the beast men that occupy the Axe world are creatures of chaos. And so Angrboda would be a creature of chaos as well. A creature. She's a giant, a goddess of chaos. Sort of like a quote-unquote bad goddess. But because those monsters are birthed to test people, you could have a player who wanted to be like a cleric of Angrboda, who's either, seeking adventure because she's undergoing the tests herself, or because she's, assisting others with the tests, or because she wants to test others. She's actually accompanied, she has wolf companions, more so than, I think this is under her identity as Yarnvidia, she of the Iron Wood. She has wolf companions that follow her around. These are not Fenrir, they're a separate set of wolves that are her compatriots. Okay, so next is one of the gods in Norse mythology named Skadi. Bang. And she is actually a giant. She was not one of the gods in Norse mythology. She was a giantess, and she won the right to marry one of the gods, and thought that she was going to marry the most beautiful god, who was, if I remember correctly, Balder, and ended up marrying a god of the ocean, whose name escapes me, but it starts with an N. Because the gods set up a curtain, and they had the male gods who were eligible to be wed stand behind it, so she could only see their feet. And she picked the cleanest feet, because they looked the best, and it turned out it was because it was the god of the ocean. He had been walking up and down in the tide water, so his feet were clean and apparently looked the best. Whereas she was hoping that it was going to be Balder, who was the prettiest of the male gods. But anyway, Skadi. So she's a frost giant. She lives up in the highest reaches of the mountains. And within Norse mythology, she's known as a hunter. So she's very highly associated with the bow and arrow. She also invented skis and snowshoes. So she's really good at getting around in the high, snowy peaks of the mountains. In this case, her name means either harm. So Skadi means either harm or shadow. And let's see, she represents, even though her name means harm or shadow, it doesn't represent darkness and cold and death. What it actually represents is survival and subsistence through the winter. So she's kind of like another Angrboda style giant, where she's kind of testing the Jotunsdottir to make sure that they are capable and that the strong ones survive and thrive, by having them, pitting them up against difficulties. But instead of the monstrous difficulties that Angrboda brings, she's more of environmental difficulties. Scarcity of game, the harsh winters and cold and elevation that you have to go through. There's actually a couple pictures of her. She's pretty popular. Whoop, that is the wrong window. Click over here. There we go. These are apparently from like a Smite. She's in Smite, so these are different outfits she can have in Smite. They're a little bit less like armory than I like. Like I said, I like to have more of a fully armored kind of deal. But she has a spear. She has a wolf companion. So that works out well. And I think there's another one. Yep. This is a line drawing somebody did. The name of it is Norse Mythology Husky, but it's not a husky. It's Skadi. Very good at tracking and wilderness survival. So one of the base classes in Axe, one of the campaign classes is the Explorer, who are obviously kind of rangery a little bit. So she would be definitely in line for those kinds of guys. All right, so next we come to a rare giant in Norse mythology. Her name is Hyndla, and her name means hound. Hyndla is a hound. She pops up very rarely in Norse mythology, but essentially she's in charge of keeping track of bloodlines. So there's a story where Freya and the gods need to figure out if this one guy is related to this other one guy. And so they go to, I think what was happening was one of the guys had died, and they needed to find an heir to inherit his stuff to avoid it from, falling into the wrong hands. And so Freya flies over and asks Hyndla, and then Hyndla is able to recite his lineage. So she keeps track of that. Now, why is that important? Well, because they're the Jotunsdotra. They need to, their ancestors are very important to them because they're descended from the giants. So they keep careful track, even if you're not born as a full-on, 9-foot tall Jotunsdotter, with the, strong blood of the giants within you, you still carry the blood of giants within you. And so your descendants could potentially manifest the stronger blood. And so it's important to keep track of who your ancestors are to make sure that you are keeping that giant's blood within your family. So what else we got here? She lives deep in an ice cave. She's guarded by Ettins. Fun fact, the name for Ettin, which is most commonly, like in D&D, the Ettin is a two-headed giant. Ettin and Jotun share a similar etymologic history. It's thought that the Jotun in the Norse language comes from the same word that Ettin is coming from. So Ettin by itself is just kind of a giant, and Jotun became a giant as well. She usually appears as an old woman. In this case, this is her lying here, and she's got gray hair. But even though she herself is a giant, she normally she's so bent over because she's so old. She's about the size of a human in height. Of course, she's all bent, and so she's much bigger than a human overall. And normally when you encounter her, not that people would, but within the myth, she's usually found, and she looks like she's asleep, but what she's actually doing is kind of quote-unquote astral traveling. She's sending her mind out into the world to walk around in spirit form to find all of these secrets and keep track of all of this information. She's also a goddess who's in charge of... Oh, that's not him. Prophecy. Because it's not so much that she can see the future, but she can follow the path of a bloodline or, the events of history so well that she can predict what's going to happen because she can keep track of all of this disparate information. So she's actually really good at making predictions. And then she's also a spellcaster. She's one of the few female giants who knows magic. But for her, it's not so much that she practices the magic as she just knows the magic. Okay, so then we get into our normal gods. There's not too many of these. Obviously, we have Odin, the Norse god. In this case, so the giants, the Jotunsdotra, brought their giant religion with them to Birmver. And the Voss and the Varsk had their own, gods and whatnot that they followed. And the Birmver, for the most part, not the Birmver, the Jotunsdotra weren't too keen on it. But there were a couple that they let them have, the main one being Odin. And the reason why is because Odin is actually half giant, if you didn't know. In Norse mythology, Odin was born to a giantess named Bestla. So he is fully half giant. So they allowed the Voss and the Voss, essentially. I keep saying Voss and Varsk. The Jotunsdottir have nothing to do with the Varsk. The Vars are bad guys, but they do have with the Voss. So they allowed them to keep Odin. And especially because within Norse mythology, Odin kind of represents all the things that you're not supposed to do as a man. He's known very well as a spellcaster, someone who is interested in knowledge, not so much battle, and also someone who is willing to play not so much tricks like Loki, but he's conniving, and he will favor particular people and do whatever it takes to make sure that they win. Not so much because they're the best, but just because they're the one that he chose. And so he's, in addition to like the nobility, in Norse mythology, he's also basically the main god of outcasts and outlaws. And so the kinds of things that, in Norse mythology, especially the magic, the fact that he uses magic so much, magic is a very non-manly thing. It's a woman's thing. And yet here you have the father of all the gods using magic and kind of being effeminate and not a man within their culture. So it was kind of a weird dynamic for him. But since we're flipping that script, he epitomizes everything that the Jotunsdottir think a man should be, or think that a man is, essentially, within man's nature. He doesn't have the strength like giants do. He can't be straightforward, so he's going to be a conniver. He's going to make secret plans. He's going to use a crutch-like magic to accomplish his ends, because he's just a weak little man. And of course, he only has one eye, etc. There's a more regal picture of him. A more common god, both in real life and among the Norse and in Birmver for the Voss and the Varsk, is Thor. So Thor is acceptable to the Jotunsdottir. They're fine with Odin. Like, they don't really have a problem with Odin. Thor they kind of have a problem with, but the thing is, Thor is... his father is Odin, who's half giant, and his mother was a giant named... Do I have her name written down here? Jord. So Odin and Jord. So he's actually, again, half giant on his mother's side and a quarter giant on his father's side. So he is more giant even than Thor was. I mean, even than Odin was, if I remember correctly. And so they tolerate him, but they don't like him. And the reason they don't like him is because he is epitomizing everything that they don't think the Voss should be. He makes them, the Thor epitomizes kind of what would normally be masculinity. He's strong. He's not like super smart, but he's smart enough. He's able to trick people sometimes, which was a big thing in among the Norse, was being able to outsmart people. And not that any of the Voss would ever say it, but the Varsk are perfectly fine mentioning the fact that Thor is also known as the Giant Slayer. So, The Voss, if they're going to kind of be... Once you get out towards the borderlands of Birmver, where the Jotunsdottir don't have as strong of a presence among themselves, and it's mostly Voss, you'll find that some of the Voss will call him Thor Odinson. And that's kind of their way of being a little bit subversive and a little bit rebellious. Because among the Jotunsdottir, you don't call people by their father's name. They're named for their mother. And so calling him Thor Odinson is, subverting that. But, I mean, otherwise, Thor is exactly what Thor is. He is known to kill gods. He wields his magic hammer, etc. He has power over storms. And he's the most popular of the gods among the Voss and the Varsk. So there's plenty of Thor to go around. Now, I don't have pictures for it, because I think this will wrap right back around. Yeah. But I've decided that Frey and Freya I'm just going to co-opt both of them and make them the god and the goddess in charge of elves. Freya is the warrior goddess of the elves. And Freyr is the warrior god of the elves, and Freya is the magic goddess of the elves in the area. Their names actually mean lord and lady. Freyr means lord and Freya means lady. They're androgynous and they're sibling spouses among the elves. So they are brother and sister and husband and wife, because elves are freaky like that. Another placeholder, I haven't figured out what to do with dwarves. I know exactly what I want dwarves to be over in Kandrakar, and I haven't settled on whether or not all the dwarves in Fenero, are they all the Kandrakar dwarves, or are they a different set of dwarves? But I'm going to use Snorri. So Snorri is a dwarf from one of the Norse myths, and just make him the placeholder god for dwarves for now. At least in the Birmver area, they worship the dwarf god Snorri. And then the last one isn't really a god. It's just it's kind of like a primal force that they acknowledge. Among the Voss and the Varsk, there are these berserkers, and more so than others, they get possessed by this spirit of rage that completely throws any kind of caution out. They don't have any concern for themselves. They only want to destroy others when they enter into this. And the Voss and the Varsk call this spirit Hjuri, 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 and that's essentially all that it is just the berserker style is embodied by Hjuri. Now there's within Axe, there's a proficiency system. All characters get to pick these proficiencies based on their class, and then there's some that are generalized. One of them is called Berserker Gang, and it's essentially like a miniature rage. That is not the real rage that Hjuri grants. That is just a reckless style of combat. It is not the ridiculously reckless, rage-filled automaton style of fighting that you can get among the Voss and the Varsk. I'm trying to find... I think I found a Berserker class that has a stronger version of it. I know there's a Dwarven version of that class that has a stronger version. And that is the mechanical basis of Hjuri among these characters. But like I said, on top of all of these things, you can basically, if there's a particular Norse god or goddess or whatever you want to worship, fine. If you want to worship a god who isn't even among the Norse, fine. Who cares? We'll figure out a way to do that. But yeah, let's go to one of my favorite pictures. This one. We'll go with this one. Until next time, bye-bye.